Gu Junruo, the most talented woman in the capital, married Han Mu, the most beautiful man in the capital. It seemed like a beautiful story, but no one in the capital thought it was a good marriage. Because the most beautiful man in Beijing has another more important title, the most playboy in Beijing. Sure enough, Gu Junruo had just entered the wedding banquet when an accident occurred. Han Mu broke the leg of Jiang Huai, the second son of Marquis Yongping, who came to observe the ceremony. On the third day of his wedding, he was expelled from the capital and went to work as a county magistrate in a barren county. No one thinks this is a good relationship, even Han Mu thinks the same, and once wanted Gu Junruo to escape from his bitter sea. Keywords of the novel. Zhenglianjuan no pop-ups, Zhenglianjuan TXT complete collection download, Zhenglianjuan latest chapter reading. Chapter 1. Robbery. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Robbery. The carriage shook and Gu Junruo lifted his eyes and glanced at Han Mu across from him. He saw that his eyelids were drooping and he was almost asleep. Han Mu seemed to notice her gaze and suddenly opened his eyes, staring at her. He couldn't help but sit straight, only to do so. He pulled the wound on his buttocks and couldn't help but hiss, reaching out to help her. Gu Junruo's gaze followed his hand and landed on his waist. Han Mu met her gaze, restrained his hand, and glared at her. What are you looking at? Is your waist okay? Husband, you've been sitting on this board for 10 days, haven't you? Gu Junruo said with a smile on his face. Good morning. Han Mu tried hard to sit up straight, making himself look more imposing. I've been sitting for a long time and my back hurts. That husband's waist is really bad. Han Mu's face turned black. He said that the man's waist was not good, which was the biggest humiliation. He lowered his face and looked at Gu Junruo displeased, saying, my waist is not good. The lady will know when the wedding day comes. Gu Junruo snorted softly and turned away from him, but still muttered, it's not necessarily possible to have a bridal chamber. Han Mu felt even more humiliated and was about to argue with her when the carriage suddenly shook and stopped. The two of them rushed forward together due to inertia. Han Mu quickly caught Gu Junruo with his eyes and hands, but he couldn't stabilize his body. He led her forward and placed his right hand on the back of her head, hitting the wall of the car and pressing himself against Gu Junruo. Gu Junruo's face turned slightly red. As soon as the carriage stopped, she reached out and pushed the person away. She propped herself up and sat up. Seeing his pale face, she shook her hands and asked, are you okay? Han Mu saved face and pretended to be strong. It's okay. Do I feel like someone with something to do? Gu Junruo took his hand and saw that the back of his hand had been scratched and was oozing blood, and it was still a large area. Half of the back of his hand was red. Her face changed and she quickly took out a handkerchief to bandage him. The outside of the car was already in chaos, and the two of them heard Xiao Bei shouting outside, you're not going to die anymore. The car is charging towards the road without looking. Then I heard someone stuttering and shouting, fight, fight, rob. Gu Junruo paused and lifted his head to look at Han Mu, who also looked at her. The two of them walked forward together and quickly lifted the curtain. Their servant and maid were sitting on the carriage shaft, looking at the 5 or 6 people blocking in front of the carriage with a surprised expression. Oh no, considering the 2 people sitting under the tree together, there were 7 or 8 people. Gu Junruo's gaze shifted from their thin and yellow faces to the clothes they were wearing, which were in tatters and looked more like beggars than robbers. Looking at the weapons in their hands, there are kitchen knives, hoes, and wooden sticks. Gu Junruo couldn't help but look at Han Mu and said, we have already entered the territory of Yixian. Speaking of which, these are your people, do you manage them? Han Mu saw them struggling like this and still came out to rob, refusing to admit that they were his subjects. I haven't taken office yet, I don't count, he said. What are you whispering about? Hurry up and get off the car and hand over the food and money you brought. The leader waved his kitchen knife and cursed, I'll kill you if I don't listen. Gu Junruo's face darkened and he asked, have you ever killed someone? Murder. That's just a small matter. We've even eaten human flesh before. The other person's thin and yellow face was full of resentment, and their eyes were fierce as they stared at them. Their gaze turned around and around on Gu Junruo's face, and suddenly a lewd smile appeared as they looked at her meaningfully. It's nothing without food and money. Look at you, this lady looks pretty good. When you sell it to the flower house, you'll be able to fill your stomach for a few days. Turning his gaze to Hanmu Jianmei's face, he was even more amazed. Just as he was about to speak, Hanmu's face had already changed as he looked at Gu Junruo. When he heard him speak ill of him, he reached out to grab Gu Junruo and push him into the car. He then jumped off the car and kicked him away. The other person only felt that a flower in front of him had been kicked away. He couldn't help but cover his stomach and spit out a mouthful of blood. His eyes narrowed and he looked up at Hanmu in shock. You. Hanmu stepped on his knife-holding hand with a gloomy expression. My wife is also something you can flirt with. He stepped on the other person's hand and crushed it until they let go of the kitchen knife in pain, then he kicked it away and looked coldly at the other robbers. The other party held their palms and howled in agony. Seeing their subordinates watching from the side, they took a step back and couldn't help but shout, "What are you still staring at? If you don't want to starve to death, go ahead." As soon as the others heard this, their timid gaze sharpened and their demeanor changed. They immediately grabbed their weapons and shouted loudly as the North Korean mook rushed towards them. Hanmu comes from a family of martial arts generals. Even if he is a playboy, he has been practicing archery, horseback riding, and swordsmanship since childhood, so he is naturally not afraid. He reached out and kicked off a hoe in one person's hand, spun around and turned to the middle of them, and one by one removed their weapons. Due to the excessive movement, it affected the wound on his buttocks, causing his cold expression to break for a moment. Then, he acted even faster and knocked the person down in a few strokes, stacking them one by one and throwing them to the ground. He's angry, he must fight and make a quick decision. Gu Junruo was pushed into the car, but she was still worried. Hanmu had just been punished with a cane, and just now he broke the back of his hand. She quickly pulled the curtain at the beginning, turned around, and poked her head out again. Coincidentally, she saw Hanmu kick the last person into the pile of people, overlapping with the person in front of her. She was about to breathe a sigh of relief when Guang saw that the previous person had already touched the kitchen knife and stood behind Hanmu at some point, holding it up and cutting towards him. Gu Junruo's face changed and he couldn't help but shout out, "Hanmu, be careful." Hanmu didn't turn back either. He turned his steps and dodged to the side. He turned around and grabbed his wrist, twisted it and put down the kitchen knife. He held the knife in one hand and slapped him on the head with a few slaps. He scolded, "I'll call you a sneak attack from behind, I'll call you a robber. I don't know, sneak attacks from behind are despicable, I'll be a robber." Hanmu gritted his teeth and said, "Did the robber embarrass me?" The other person's brain was hit several times, and he was hungry. When Hanmu stopped, he looked at him with golden stars in his eyes, shook his body twice, and then slammed back onto the ground. Hanmu was so scared that he jumped back and turned his head to meet Gu Junruo's silent gaze. He immediately defended himself, "It wasn't me who did it, I didn't use much force." Gu Junruo withdrew his gaze, stood up from the carriage shaft, and looked down at the robbers who were all knocked down by Hanmu, saying, "Let's tie them up first. Even if they seem to have no resistance, they cannot neglect it." Xiao Bei just jumped out of the car and grabbed a rope to tie everyone up. Finally, he looked at an old and a young person sitting under a tree not far away and turned his head to ask Hanmu, "Lang Jun, are those two caught?" Hanmu turned his head and saw an old man and a little boy about 7 or 8 years old sitting under the tree. Both of them were thin, with little flesh on their faces, and their eyes were particularly big. At this moment, the two of them were looking at them in panic. The old man got up and wanted to drag the child away, but he was too hungry and had no strength in his hands. He pulled the child twice but did not move it. Seeing Han Mu rushing towards them, he quickly knelt down and kowtowed repeatedly, saying, "Please spare your life, please spare your life. We dare not dare not again." Han Mu. Junruo stopped him and shook his head at him when he turned around. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Questions. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Questions. Han Mu frowned and felt that she was a woman of kindness. "They are robbers," he said. Junruo said, "Have you ever seen a robber who can't even drag a child? Or have you seen a 7 or 8-year-old robber who can't even run?" Han Mu choked for a moment and said, "Young master, I haven't seen a robber before. This is the first time I've seen him." "Why, does the lady often see him?" "Although it's the first time I've seen it, I'll use my brain to think," Junruo said, lifting his chin. "Bring them over and ask questions. With the elderly and children around, their mouths can be a little softer." Han Mu looked up at the sky and said, "I don't know how far away the county town is. We won't be able to get there before the sun sets here. Are you going to camp in the wilderness?" He said, "If you want me to see it, why don't you just tie it up and drag it back to the county town, put it in jail and ask slowly. Anyway, they're all robbers, and will end up in jail. You are a new county magistrate, new to Yixian, and you don't know what the situation is. If you drag people back, your eyes will turn black. Whether it's your turn to ask questions is a question," Junruo said. "Why don't you ask here? These people seem to be locals, and even if you don't know much about the situation in Yixian, you can still tell 2 or 3 points. We are prepared here so that we won't be fooled when we arrive." Although Han Mu looked dissatisfied, he still lifted his chin at the 2 people under the tree and ordered, "Come here, let me ask you a few questions. If you answer well, I will let you go." Although the old man doubted their sincerity, they didn't have the right to choose now. So they stood up and helped the child, wanting to take him over. However, the child was already starving and almost fainted. At this moment, his hands and feet were weak and he had no strength to stand up. Han Mu frowned slightly and went forward to take a look. Junruo quickly followed suit. Han Mu reached out and touched the child, and the child's eyes rolled over, making him dizzy. Han Mu took a step back in fear and immediately clarified with Junruo, "I didn't exert any force, I just lightly touched him." Junruo touched his hand and pulse and said, "You're hungry, Xiaochan. Take our water bag and our dry food, come on." Junruo's maid Xiaochan gave a crisp response, turned around, grabbed a water bag and a package from the car, and ran over. Junruo took the water bag, carefully fed the child, then pulled the bag out of a bowl, poured half a bowl of water into it, and said to Han Mu, "Tear up the mantu and soak it." When the old man saw the big white mantu wrapped in paper in the bundle, his eyes turned green. He hurriedly said, "Don't tear it, don't tear it." He shook the child and said, Sanbao, Sanbao, wake up quickly. We have something to eat, we have something to eat." Han Mu has reached out and grabbed a mantu and torn it open. He has soaked it in warm water and muttered, "I'm dizzy from hunger. It's strange to wake up." When the baby was fed the soft mantu, he still had consciousness. He should have smelled the fragrance of the food and swallowed the food he put into his mouth, subconsciously seeing that he could eat. Junruo breathed a sigh of relief and noticed that Han Mu beside him also relaxed. She then looked up at him. Han Mu was still tearing mantu. Seeing her look, her face became worried. "What are you looking at? Don't feed me quickly, or I will be camping out tonight." In the end, they ended up camping in the wilderness. They only have 1 car and 2 horses. These robbers are old and young, and the remaining 6, although young and strong, have yellow faces, thin muscles, and were injured by Han Mu, making it difficult for them to walk quickly. Seeing that he couldn't enter the city before dark, Han Mu decided to break the jar and camp on the spot. Xiao Bei pulled 6 middle-aged robbers to 2 trees and tied them up. 3 robbers were sitting around one tree, tied up with a rope. After 6 robbers woke up under 2 trees, they stared wide-eyed and became frightened. Han Mu came over with a white mantu, and everyone's eyes were fixed on his hands. Han Mu threw away the big white mantu in his hand and asked, "Why do you want to eat it?" He chuckled and then his face turned cold. He changed his face and said, "No. 6 robbers." Junruo squatted in front of the child and watched him eat. He turned his head to look at Han Mu, shook his head slightly, and turned his head to look at the child gently. "You've been hungry for too long, so it's not good to eat too much at once. Wait a moment before eating," he said. The child dared not make any demands and timidly glanced at the old man next to him, nodding. Junruo smiled and handed the remaining half of the mantu to the old man. Seeing that he had taken it and stuffed it into his mouth, he quickly poured a bowl of water for him. "Slow down," he said softly. Seeing the old man eating, Junruo asked the child, "What's your name?" The child whispered back, "My name is Sanbao." Junruo glanced at the old man next to him and asked, "Is this your grandfather?" The child nodded and whispered, "It's my grandfather." Junruo said, "Who is your father among the 6 people?" The child pointed out a finger. Junruo saw that it was a man who had attacked Han Mu with a hoe. He had a long thin face. At this time, he was constantly looking at Han Mu's mantu and their side. Junruo's gaze turned and he saw the young man next to him occasionally looking towards him. He pointed at him and asked the child, "Who is he then?" "Child. It's my second uncle." "Is this still a family crime?" Junruo asked, "Do you know the remaining 4 people?" The child shook his head, nodded again, and then pointed to the young man tied to another tree, saying, "That's Uncle Tang, that's Uncle Zhu." Junruo remembered them one by one in his heart, pointing to the young man in charge and the person next to him and asking, "What about those 2?" The child shook his head and said, "I don't know." After thinking for a moment, he said, "Dad's friend." "No, no," the old man who finally swallowed the mantu and drank 2 mouthfuls of water said hurriedly. "That's not Dogwang's friend. That's Chen Huang. He fled to our village from outside. It's really cruel. He threatened my sons with a knife and asked them to rob with him, or he would kill us and eat meat." The old man wiped his tears and said, "Madam, we are all forced and helpless. We didn't mean to rob you. Please spare us a lot, madam." To his words, Junruo only believed 3 parts, but she didn't show it. Instead, she looked at him with a sympathetic expression and asked, "Is this territory so difficult that it's going to eat human flesh? You don't even have food at home." This touched on the pain in the old man's heart, and there was nothing he couldn't say. Moreover, speaking pitifully could also earn some sympathy, so he poured beans out of a bamboo tube and said whatever he wanted. "It's a disaster, there's already no food left. Does the court not provide disaster relief?" The county magistrate led someone to block the dam entrance, but he died. The county government released the grain once, saying that all the grain had been given to us, but it was gone. Junruo asked, "Does the grain shop also have no grain?" "No grain merchants bring in grain." "Oh, can anyone afford the grain in the grain shop?" Now the grain price has risen to 180 won per bushel. Junruo widened his eyes and said, "So high?" Han Mu walked over at some point, looking puzzled. "Is it very high? This is my first time writing a short article, please support me." End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Grain Prices. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3 Grain Prices. Junruo turned to look at Han Mu and said, "Before we set off, the usual price of rice in the grain shops in the capital was 14 won per dough. This is because it is April, when there is a shortage of crops, and it is usually cheaper, about 12 won per dough." The old man said, "This lady is right. The rice here used to only cost 10 won, which is cheaper." Mianzhou is located on the border of the Zhou, Qi, and Chen 3 kingdoms, adjacent to Jiangling. It has a dense water network, numerous paddy fields, and fertile land. Before the world was divided into 3 countries, it was also a land of fish and rice. Even though conflicts occasionally occur on this land now, the rice here is still cheaper than outside. Han Mu calculated the price difference between the two and frowned, feeling a bit angry. Did you encounter an unscrupulous businessman? Gu Junruo said, you first ask clearly, it doesn't necessarily mean you are a dishonest merchant, and there are so many grain merchants. Do you know who is dishonest and who is loyal? Han Mu said, they're all mixed in the same pot to eat. I don't believe anyone can escape. They're all unscrupulous merchants. He turned his head and asked the old man, is there really no food left in the county government? The old man didn't know if it was there, but the Yamen guards in the county government are also very hungry. They should really be gone. Han Mu felt a headache and squatted on the ground from a distance, tapping on the tree branch and saying, it's over. We don't have much money on us. When we enter the county town, a group of starving people are waiting to be fed. What should I use to support them? Gu Junruo walked up to him and glanced at him upon hearing the words, I thought you would want to go back to Beijing. Han Mu said, I do want to go back, but can I go back? He said, and it's not my Han family who did this. Since I became their county magistrate. He paused and said, at least until the next county magistrate arrives, I can't leave them behind. Gu Junruo's admiration that had just risen dissipated in an instant, is the next county magistrate here? That's right, Han Mu said naturally. Take a look at what Yixian has become. The people have all robbed their homes. Do you think I can be their county magistrate? Without waiting for Gu Junruo to speak, Han Mu replied directly, of course not. Gu Junruo choked. Even if I were to be punished for stationing troops, it would be better than serving as a county magistrate. I am not the material for governing the local area, Han Mu said. When I enter the county town, I will write a letter to ask the court to send another county magistrate over. I still don't want to blame them. Gu Junruo said slowly, you came to Yixian because you made a mistake. Do you think your majesty will agree, and the Jiang family will agree? But I can't be a county magistrate. Well, Han Mu was very self-aware. What they want is if you can't do it well, Gu Junruo said. Only if you can't do it well, will they have an excuse to deal with you. Because of Jiang Huai's leg, you have already been punished from the capital to Yixian. If you can't do it well, not to mention deploying troops, you may not even have an official position. Han Mu said, if not, then not. I don't want to become an official yet. Gu Junruo said, it will also implicate my father-in-law and elder brother, doesn't it matter? Han Mu frowned and said, Jiang Huai's leg is so precious. Isn't it just a broken bone? I'm afraid it won't take 2 months to bounce around. Gu Junruo said calmly, whoever's child feels sorry for him. Obviously, Marquis Yongping feels very sorry for his son. Han Mu was so angry that he turned around in circles and finally stood in front of Gu Junruo, pointing at her and asking, so what do you say? Be the magistrate of Yixian County. Gu Junruo looked up at him seriously and said, make contributions and return to Beijing in a fair and upright manner. This not only slaps their faces, but also gives face to us Han parents. Han Mu gave her a strange glance and said, are you hot? Do you think I can be a county magistrate? He had a clear understanding of himself. Originally, if Yixian were an ordinary county town, it would be more remote. I could have been a county magistrate by following the rules, but now there is not even enough food here, and we don't bring much money when we come out. When I am a county magistrate, not to mention supporting so many people, I can't even support myself. Gu Junruo, I'll help you. Han Mu looked at her in surprise. Gu Junruo looked at him calmly and said, why, don't you believe me? Not at all. The most talented woman in the capital is at least somewhat talented, but why use an ox knife to kill a chicken? Han Mu had always wanted to have a serious conversation with her, but didn't have the chance. Since the conversation was rushed to this point today, he simply asked honestly, "Do you really plan to marry me and spend your whole life with me?" "Gu Junruo, didn't your family come to propose marriage to me?" Han Mu's face turned pale red and he said with a hint of hesitation, "Yes, but I didn't expect you to agree at the time. I thought you looked down on me." Moreover, he went to propose marriage with Jiang Huai in front and back. Jiang Huaisu was known for his talent, and he thought that Gu Junruo would choose Jiang Huai over him. Gu Junruo, however, did not want to continue the topic and changed the subject, saying, "So do you want to go back to the capital city openly?" She said, "If you manage Yixian well and make a difference in your career, being promoted back to Beijing is the best way. Of course, if you want to escape in the face of danger, you can also write a letter stating your incompetence. However, in this way, our Han family's face will be trampled on in the future, and my father-in-law and elder brother will have no face when going out to see colleagues." Okay, don't provoke me." Han Mu squatted on the ground and thought for a while before looking up at her. "Do you really have the ability to manage Yixian well?" He said, "There's still time for us to go back on our word. We can slowly enter the city. We'll write a letter back to the capital and ask your majesty to send another county magistrate, and then I'll take any punishment. After pondering for a moment, Han Mu said, "Isn't this actually better? Punishment is all my own business. You can go back to Beijing and continue to be your daughter. Is it okay if you get beaten or punished?" Seeing Han Mu looking at her in surprise, Gu Junruo paused, his face turned cold again, and he said calmly, "Husband and wife are one, and now in the eyes of outsiders, we are husband and wife. If you are humiliated, then it is me who is humiliated." She said, "Although I don't have any experience in managing county affairs, when my grandfather was alive, I often read official documents to him. I have seen him deal with conflicts from various places, and I barely understand some. And who is born to know? When I get to the county government, I just start learning again." Han Mu looked at her steadily. After a while, he clenched his fist and said, "Okay, we're done." He turned his head to look at the grandparents and grandchildren snuggling together under the tree, frowned, and said, "What should we do now?" "Put them in jail too." Gu Junruo said, "Now go and explore the affairs of Yixian with them first. Don't let them know that you are the county magistrate. We can only decide what to do next after we have a clear idea." Han Mu muttered, "What else can I ask? Isn't it just that there's no food, no money, and the people are hungry? Can we still ask more questions?" Gu Junruo looked at him, turned and walked to the old man. She found a mantu and divided it into 2 parts. She gave them 2, 1.5, and squatted beside him to talk to him. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Not being a person. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Not being a person, don't deserve it, the old man squeezed half of the mantu in his hand, bowed and replied, "My name is Sunday. Everyone calls me Old Sun too when I'm old." Gu Junruo glanced at Guden and asked, "Is there only one grandson?" Sanbao on the side took the mantu and stuffed it into his mouth. He ate it carefully, but he heard Gu Junruo's words and said vaguely, "I still have my brother and sister, but they are all dead." Upon hearing this, Han Mu, who came forward, paused and silently crouched aside. Old Sun wiped his tears and said, "The year is not good." Then Han Mu squatted on the sidelines and listened to Gu Junruo talk about the village. Speaking of the years, he learned that his family lived in Sunjiazwang, with 90% of the entire village surnamed Sun and the remaining 10% either surnamed Zhang or anything else, all of whom had fled to settle down in the past few decades. There are a total of 68 households in their village, which can be considered a large village. This time, the flood came urgently and greatly, and the houses were washed away immediately. Many people were immediately washed away by the water. The remaining people in the village returned to the village to tidy up their things after the flood receded, and found that the food was either washed away or soaked and sprouted. The farmland has been washed away, and there will be no harvest this year. Everyone has no choice but to flee to the county town or directly leave Yixian and go north to survive. There are many villages in the same situation as Sun Family Village, and at this time, not a single household of 10 people remains in the village. Only these 3 households were left in the Sun Family Village, with those who died earlier and those who fled. The population of these 3 households was not large either. Chen Huanghao broke into the village with the person named Tian Feng. He first snatched and ate all the things they had left, and then used a knife to force them to come out and rob together. In fact, there's no need for him to force him hard. Old Sun Tu and his 3 families are all at the end of their lives. If they don't come out to rob others, they will also starve to death. So they can calculate that they followed Chen Huang out with half an effort. Gu Junruo also asked about the situation in the county town and the measures taken by the county government after the flood. So they found out about 2 wealthy families in the county, the Yu family and the Xing family, who had been providing relief to the disaster victims. Han Mu asked, since you have opened a congee shed, why don't you eat it instead of robbing people on the road? Head Sun said, yes, why not? There are too many people waiting to eat congee in the county town. The water for congee is limited. We have been queuing for 3 days without taking the turn. We can't grab it, but we have no strength to fight. Finally, we have to leave. He said, I'm afraid I'll starve to death if I stay in the county town. If I come out, I won't be able to find food. I'll eat some bark and soil, and at least I can survive for a few more days. Han Mu. Is it a robbery? Old Sun lowered his head in shame. Gu Junruo glanced at Han Mu and said to Lao Sun Tu, let's do it tonight. Tomorrow, you will follow us back to the county town. The judgment will be determined by law. Old Sun hurriedly asked, is there any food to eat in prison? If there is, they don't mind going to jail. Han Mu said. You are sinners. Do you know what sinners are? You don't want to redeem yourself, but you want to eat my free rice. Old Sun was confused, why did he just eat this gentleman's plain rice? Gu Junruo reached out and pulled him away, alright, they're hungry right now. What's the use of telling them all this? Why is it useless? Although I don't like reading, I also know that one of the responsibilities of a county magistrate is to educate and govern the people. I was just fulfilling my duties as a county magistrate, educating him. The granary is solid but knows etiquette, and the clothing and food are sufficient but knows honor and disgrace. They are now without clothing or food, and your education is not as valuable as a grain of rice to them. At this time, using etiquette to educate them not only fails to achieve the goal, but also appears to be disrespectful of etiquette and law. Gu Junruo said, why not say anything and wait until their difficulties are solved before educating them? Han Mu touched his chin and said, it's not difficult to solve their predicament. Although I don't have a lot of money now, I can still raise a few people. Gu Junruo glanced at him and asked, what do you plan to do with them? Han Mu turned his head to look at the robbers and let out a cold snort. Although they are very pitiful, we cannot erase the fact that they once robbed people with weapons, and if it were not them who were robbed today, but someone else, with Chen Huang's ferocity, the fate of the robbed person would not be very good. So Han Mu decided to lock them up in prison and only let Old Sun Tu and San Bao go. The next morning, they pulled everyone up and set off. 6 robbers, one of whom was tied up and tied behind the car, saw their faces pale and their lips white. Han Mu gave them a mantou each and let them go after eating. The 4 of Sun Dogwang held the last bit of mantou, and their tears were streaming. They felt that if there were mantou to eat in the prison, even if they were to be beheaded at the next moment, they would be willing. Only Chen Huang, while biting mantou, stared at Han Mu fiercely, and his malicious eyes swept Gu Junruo from time to time. Han Mu turned his head and looked over. As soon as Chen Huang touched his gaze, he lowered his head and lowered his gaze, avoiding his gaze. Han Mu gave him a cold glance and reached out to pull Gu Junruo. Let's go, get in the car. The forest where they stayed overnight was not far from the county town, and they arrived in less than an hour, pulling people behind the car. Xiao Bei stopped the carriage and said, Erlang, we're here. He looked up at the dilapidated city gate with a shocked expression and sighed sincerely, it's really shabby. How dilapidated is it? Han Mu brushed open the curtain and looked out. When he saw the dirt-yellow city walls with potholes and even many moss and weeds growing, he looked at the city gate again. There was no one guarding it, no one entering or leaving, only 3 or 4 ragged people lying in the doorway. Han Mu. He shook the corners of his mouth and said, is this where I took office? Gu Junruo also stretched out her head to look, also shocked. However, she quickly accepted the reality and patted his shoulder, saying, the people are so hungry they have gone out to rob, and such a situation has long been anticipated. Han Mu. The Jiang family is bullying people too much. He angrily said, if you retaliate against me, then retaliate against me. Take the life and death of a county's people to retaliate against me. It's simply. Han Mu's vocabulary is a bit limited, and he couldn't find suitable cursing words at the moment. Gu Junruo offered with friendship, in vain are you a minister, in vain are you a son. That's right. You're a useless servant. Han Mu paused and turned his head to look at her. What do you say about being a useless son? Gu Junruo's plain face said, another way to say that you are not a good person. She retracted her head and tidied up her clothes. Being an official is not for the people, but for personal revenge and not hearing about the lives and deaths of the people. Is this still a human? No, you scolded well. Gu Junruo corrected himself and said, no, it's you who cursed. I'll just curse, I'm afraid of them. Han Mu sighed as he looked at the people lying on the ground, feeling a heavy burden on his shoulders. Let's go to the city. I hope the situation in the county government can improve. Sitting on the carriage shaft, the old grandson trembled as he held on to the 3 treasures. He now understood that the nobleman who had captured and saved them seemed to be the new county magistrate. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Yixian County. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Yixian County. The carriage entered the city gate, and Han Mu and Gu Junruo looked out the car window left and right, giving them only one impression of the entire Yixian County. Dead silence. On both sides of the road, there were 3 or 5 people lying apart. When they saw a carriage coming in, some sat up and looked at it with green eyes, while others stared at it with a numb expression. The shops on both sides, not to mention opening doors, couldn't even hear anyone, as if the entire city was only inhabited by these people lying on the streets. Han Mu's heart sank deeper and deeper. When he arrived at the entrance of the county government office, he saw the thin and weak yamen guard sitting next to it. Finally, he couldn't help but curse again, his grandmother's Jiang family, don't let me see Jiang Huai next time, otherwise I'll hit him every time I see him. Before getting off the car, Han Mu looked at Gu Junruo and asked again, can you really cure Yixian? If not, let's take advantage of the morning book and ask His Majesty to send another capable minister. The longer Yixian stays like this, the more people will die. Gu Junruo said, Yixian is already like this, and it's not your responsibility to get worse. But if you do it well, then you are turning the tide. This is a significant achievement, don't you feel tempted? Han Mu's face darkened and he said, are you betting on the lives of all the people in the county? Gu Junruo, you look up to me too much. Gu Junruo smiled slightly and said, no, you didn't disappoint me. Her gaze crossed over him and looked at the county government gate outside the car. Although cold, she said firmly, don't worry, if you can't even cure Yixian, then the county magistrate who comes again won't be able to cure it. For the people here, you are the best choice. After speaking, get off the car over him. Han Mu was stunned and couldn't help but mutter, how come I didn't know I was so talented? Aren't I just a playboy? The Yamen attendant saw a car stopping at the county Yamen gate, so he lazily looked down and saw a string of people pulling behind them, with some hose, wooden sticks, and other things still hanging on the car. With just one glance, he knew what the situation was. It must have been the starving disaster victims who went out to rob, only to encounter a tough situation. This is the official's arrival. He understood what was going on in his heart, so he was too lazy to get up and waved at them. He said weakly, "Go, go. The county magistrate is not here, ignore everything, and come back when there is something." Han Mu's footsteps stopped and he felt his feet itch again. If the county magistrate is not here, the county government will no longer be in charge. Where are your county lieutenant and chief clerk? The Yamen runner glanced at him and said, "I'm on leave." Han Mu said, "The county town has become like this, are they still taking leave?" Gu Junruo had already taken a bundle from Xiaochan's hand and directly asked the Yamen attendant, who is in charge of the county Yamen now. The Yamen attendant leaned back and spread out his feet, saying in a rogue voice, "No. They all said to let you go. The county Yamen is temporarily not in charge, and you don't understand human language, do you?" Han Mu was angry when he saw how disrespectful he was to Gu Junruo. He couldn't bear to see how lazy he was. He approached him and wanted to kick him up to reply. Gu Junruo grabbed him with one hand and raised the bundle in his hand at the Yamen. He said calmly, "This is the newly appointed county magistrate. Since there is no one in charge in this county Yamen, let someone go and bring back the chief clerk and county captain." The Yamen runner was stunned and looked at Gu Junruo's bundle. Although the bundle had not been opened, he did not feel that anyone dared to pretend to be the county magistrate. He quickly got up and bowed down to apologize, "I'm damned. I don't know that it is the county magistrate who is coming. Please come in. I'll let people go to the master book and the county magistrate." The Yamen official bowed down and invited them inside. Han Mu went to the county government office and snorted as he passed by. Gu Junruo walked beside him with a small bundle, followed by Xiao Bei and Xiao Chan, who both hummed along with Han Mu as they passed by the Yamen. Although the lobby of the county government office was also rudimentary, fortunately it was still clean and spacious, and there was no dilapidation. Han Mu's mood barely improved. He lifted his robe and sat in the seat, staring at the Yamen runner who followed in and asking, "What's your name?" The Yamen runner felt uneasy in his heart, "Little Ding Si." Han Mu was surprised and said, "Is there still A, B, C, and C in this county government office?" "Ah." Ding Si looked confused and quickly said, "Lord Hui, without these three people, are you looking for these three people? I'll go find the painter and immediately ask him to post the missing person." Xiao Bei and Xiao Chan couldn't help but burst out laughing. Han Mu. Gu Junruo rubbed his forehead and asked the Yamen attendant, "How many Yamen attendants are currently on duty in this county Yamen?" Ding Si hesitated and said, "About 70.80.90. Gu Junruo didn't delve deeper and said directly, "Let someone lock up the 6 people who are tied up outside. Xiao Bei, go with them and imprison Chen Huang and Tian Feng separately. They are not allowed to come into contact with the 4 Sun Dogwang." Xiao Bei glanced at Han Mu and only bowed out after receiving his nod. The Yamen runner quickly followed. The county government office, which had been silent for a long time, finally gained some popularity, and the officials who were lying inside to save energy were called out. Knowing that the new county magistrate had arrived, all the Yamen officials were energized. No matter what, they had to pass by the lobby and peek inside. I was momentarily stunned when I saw the handsome gentleman sitting tall on it. The Yamen runner who followed behind was momentarily stunned and couldn't stop his foot. He collided directly with the person who had stopped in front of him. The two of them tripped their left and right feet, and with a thud, they fell to the ground. Although they have little education, they have met many people. A person as handsome as the new county magistrate has never been seen before. Han Mu. He has long been accustomed to this kind of gaze, and in the past 2 years, with his reputation as a playboy, few people have looked at him in this way. Junruo, who was looking at the lobby of the county government office, turned his head to look at Han, who had no unusual expression, and couldn't help but smile. Han is indeed very good looking. She paid attention to him at first, wasn't it because he was good looking? The first time I saw him was at the flower viewing banquet of the eldest princess, where a 15 or 16-year-old boy sat leaning against a rockery with a wine jar. At that moment, Zongji was a graceful and beautiful young man, holding his cup and gazing at the blue sky with white eyes, as bright as a jade tree facing the wind. Only then did he truly have a picture. And after more than 3 years, the boy grew more and more open, even more beautiful like a jade tree, with a more beautiful appearance than before. He didn't speak. Han blew the dirt on the table and, with a disdainful expression, withdrew his hand from pressing the table, muttering, "This is too dirty." Junruo averted his gaze, and indeed, his beauty could only be appreciated in silence. "I don't know when the chief clerk and county captain will come over. Let's go to the backyard first." Han couldn't sit still for a long time. Upon hearing this, he immediately stood up and called out to Xiao Bei and Xiao Chan, "Let's take a look at the backyard." The layout of the county government offices in the world is similar. Han, who is familiar with the way, touched the small door connecting the backyard and saw a lock on the door. He thought that after they moved in, the lock would also need to be replaced, otherwise it would be unsafe for the women to stay. So he reached out and pulled the lock with force, and it was opened. Junruo, who was planning to have Xiao Bei search for the key, said. She silently swallowed the words to her mouth and watched as Han pushed open the door, then followed him in. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Register. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Register. The layout of the county government offices in the world is similar, and naturally, the layout of the backyard is also quite different. As soon as he entered the door, Han went straight to the main courtyard, pushed open the door, and waved at Xiao Bei, "Go and get our luggage." Xiao Bei responded and turned around to go. "Wait a minute," Junruo immediately stopped him and looked at Xiao Chan. "You go pick up our luggage." She said to Han, "I live in the main room." Han stared and said, "Why?" "The backyard is the women's home court, and in the future, I will meet all the ladies here. Do you want them to see me living in a side room?" Han opened his mouth and held back a sentence for a while. "Then you can't see me living in a side room, can you?" As soon as these words were spoken, Han became a little stronger and raised his chin, saying, "I am the county magistrate. What's wrong with me living in a side room?" "Xiao Bei, go pick up our luggage." Xiao Bei happily responded with an "ah," and turned around to run outside. "Hey, you," Xiao Chan glanced at Junruo and chased after her. Junruo's gaze met Han and in the midst of lightning and fire, she pushed him away and sat on the bed first. "I can let you do anything else for now, but the main room won't work," she said. "Coincidentally, so am I." Han also sat on the bed, occupying a large portion of the space with a big golden sword. This is about his face, he doesn't want to be pointed at in the county town. The two of them refused to give way to each other, and Xiao Bei and Xiao Chan followed the master's instructions and together brought their luggage to the main room. Junruo attempted to intimidate and lure him. "Do you still want to manage the county town well?" Han said, "Don't threaten others. We are now grasshoppers on the same rope. If you neglect your work, it will also harm yourself." Junruo looked at him angrily. Han seeing her in such a state for the first time, couldn't help but extend his finger and poke her bulging cheek. Junruo was momentarily taken aback, and then his anger vented. Han touched her gaze and suddenly withdrew his finger, pinching it in the palm of his hand. The soft and bouncing sensation lingered on his fingertips, as if it had been pressed into his heart together. He shifted his gaze somewhat uneasily and said, we have only just arrived in Yixian, and every move is being watched by people. Whether you live in a private room or I live there, it's not good. Rumors have spread that outsiders only see us as husband and wife at odds, or that you are not respected, or that my husband is weak. No matter what kind of rumor it is, it's not good for us, so. His gaze shifted and he said, cough cough, let me give you this bed, I'll sleep on it. Junruo looked at him curiously and said, why did you suddenly become so reasonable? Hanmu suddenly stood up and looked down at her, saying, then you go sleep on the couch, I'll sleep on the bed. Junruo turned his head and said to Xiaochan, bring in our luggage. Xiaochan responded happily and approached with her luggage in her arms. Hanmu wandered around the room and instructed Xiao Bei to take out his luggage. The two of them instantly divided a room in half, clearly dividing their own areas. Junruo pushed open the window and rolled up the hanging bamboo mat, just in time to see the scenery of the garden outside. Hanmu leisurely swayed over and looked out the window from behind her, what's so nice about this? Junruo said, the scenery here is very different from the capital city. Is that right? Hanmu didn't feel much about this. He looked left and right, but didn't feel any difference. Wasn't grass and trees all green, and flowers all colorful? Junruo leaned against the window and looked out at the scenery. You can see that the previous county magistrate's wife was very careful in taking care of her backyard. The flowers, plants, and trees she planted were common in the Jiangling area, not extravagant, but very elegant. Do you know what kind of person you were when you took office? Hanmu said, didn't Lao Suntu say that? He's a good county magistrate because he was washed away by the water when he went to repair the dam. Junruo said, the magistrate of Lu County was a jinshi in the 3rd year of Yuanda. Yixian was his 2nd place of office, and the first was in the prosperous Jiangling. After 2 years in office, he was demoted to the even poorer Yixian due to disrespectful behavior towards his superiors and drunken disturbances. This year is his 4th year in Yixian. In the first 3 years, except for the first year, which was a medium-grade assessment, his performance in the Ministry of Personnel in the following 2 years has been top-notch, that is, excellent. Based on this development, even if he is not promoted this year, he will still be transferred to a wealthier county. Junruo said, I think he should be very popular in the county government and throughout Yixian. In such a situation, it may not be easy for you to convince the people of the county government to use him for your own benefit. Hanmu. Why do we suddenly talk about this? Junruo lifted his chin and gestured for him to look out the window, because the people we are waiting for have arrived. Hanmu's gaze shifted from her face to the distance, and he happened to see Ding Si leading a person towards this direction. Junruo closed the window and said, let's go and welcome you. Hanmu muttered, do I, as a county magistrate, still need to go and greet people? That's what he said. He still followed Junruo and took 2 quick steps, squeezing in front of her. Junruo felt that he was very childish. After glancing at him, he quickened his pace and arrived at the door with him. Both of them raised their feet and crossed the threshold at the same time. Junruo gave him a proud glance and took advantage of his stunned time to step out of the threshold. Ding Si was just leading the people into the courtyard. When the visitor looked up and saw Hanmu and Junruo standing on the steps, he immediately put away his solemn expression and said with a friendly smile, this is the new county magistrate. Zhao Yuan, the head of Guani County, actually did not know that the county magistrate arrived today, but he was disappointed to welcome them. Junruo looked at Hanmu, who also glanced at him and said to Zhao Yuan, Mr. Zhao, you're welcome. I came suddenly, and it's normal for you to not receive me. However, this county is a bit curious. Today is not a day off, why are there so few people in the county government? Zhao Yuan didn't expect Hanmu to be so straightforward and immediately raise a question. He paused for a moment before saying, the county magistrate doesn't know. Our county government hasn't paid any salary for 2 months, and there's not a single grain of rice left in the warehouse. There's nothing to eat. In order to save energy, we have to take turns. Han Mu widened his eyes and said, "Are you saying that the county government warehouse is empty?" Zhao Yuan nodded heavily and said, "After the county magistrate opened the warehouse to release grain, there wasn't much left in the warehouse. Later, the dam broke and the flood washed away the remaining things, so." Zhao Yuan cried with red eyes, "County magistrate, it's difficult for us in Yixian." Han Mu stared at his face and couldn't help but want to mock and deceive anyone. If the county government's grain depot could be washed away by the flood, it would only indicate that the former county magistrate was incompetent, and does this clean county government backyard look like it has been washed away by a flood? Gu Junruo touched his hand, looked up, and said to Zhao Yuan, "I've been working hard for Mr. Zhao lately. My husband has just arrived and is not familiar with the situation in Yixian. I'll have to work harder for Mr. Zhao from now on." Zhao Yuan hurriedly said, "These are all actions within the jurisdiction of the lower officials. If there are any matters after the county magistrate and his wife, just give orders and the lower officials will do their best." Gu Junruo smiled and said hello, pulling on Han Mu's sleeve. Han Mu then gave him a fake smile and said, "Okay." End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Ascension. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7 Ascension. There is not a single grain of rice left in the county government warehouse, let alone the backyard. In the end, in addition to the rice, noodles, and leftover food they brought with them, they also fell into a food shortage like the people of Yixian. Han Mu sat at the table, looking at a small bag of rice that Xiao Bei had flipped out. "How many days will this be enough for us to eat?" Xiao Bei said, "If we only count the 4 of us, at most 3 days. If we include the 3 helpers sent by Mr. Zhao, it will be 1.5 days. Han Mu opened his mouth in surprise and turned his head to look at Gu Junruo. Gu Junruo took out the money bag and poured out all the silver inside, handing it to Xiao Bei. "Later, you can go to the county town and see if you can buy some food to bring back. Xiao Chan, take a look at the things that need to be added at home, and let Xiao Bei buy them together." "Yes." Xiao Bei and Xiao Chan were both busy, while Gu Junruo and Han Mu sat at the table, staring big and small. "Gu Junruo, when will you be promoted?" "I plan to be promoted." The two of them spoke at the same time, but remained silent. Han Mu paused for a moment and said, "But I haven't invited Master yet." Gu Junruo said, "I don't know the truth. Do you have the courage to hire a stranger here as a master? You're not afraid of being tricked to death. So what do you say?" Han Mu said, "There are so many court laws and regulations, I haven't memorized a few. If there is a legal error in the application of promotion, wouldn't it be embarrassing to spread it?" Gu Junruo said, "Let me be your master." After some thought, Han Muliu nodded and said, "Okay." Gu Junruo had already prepared for his opposition. She persuaded him to continue opposing, and she was prepared to continue persuading, but he unexpectedly agreed. "You just agreed in one fell swoop." Han Mu stared and said, "Aren't you just being polite to me?" "That's not true." Gu Junruo stood up, suppressing the excitement in his heart, and the corners of his mouth kept rising. "I'm going to change clothes, and that's it." Gu Junruo went to flip through the box, and Han Mu followed behind her urging, "You are the master. What kind of clothes should you change?" "If you want to change, I will change it too. Quickly find my official uniform." Gu Junruo's hand rummaged through the box, pressed down on the men's clothing underneath, and looked up, saying, "I don't need to change into men's clothing." Han Mu looked inexplicably, "Why do you want to change into men's clothing?" Gu Junruo said, "I am a woman, don't you mind if I go to court?" Han Mu looked at her and said, "Does the court still divide men and women? Hurry up and find me the official uniform." Gu Junruo closed his box and turned to flip through it, but his mouth refused to accept it. "You have hands and feet, why do you need my help? You are my wife, and now you are my master. Who are you looking for without me? Han Mu untied his belt, took off his coat, and threw it on the chair. Junruo took out his official uniform and saw him take off his coat by his side. He immediately turned around and turned his back to him, feeling embarrassed and angry, saying, "Why did you just take off your clothes?" Han Mu only took off his outer robe and was still wearing his middle coat well. He looked up from behind at Junruo's face and said, "I'm blushing and shy. I'll just change my coat." "What's the point?" His breath blew into his ear as he spoke. Junruo felt a slight fever in her ears, and she uncomfortably stuffed her official uniform into his arms. "Change your clothes quickly," she said. Han Mu couldn't help but grin silently when he saw her ears turning red. Junruo turned around and walked out of the room. As the wind blew, she felt the warmth on her face fade away. Han Mu put on his official uniform and shook his sleeves, lifting his chin and saying, "Let's go." Junruo glanced at him and followed him through the small gate into front of the county government office. Zhao, the chief clerk, was summoning the servants to speak in the courtyard when he looked up and saw Han Mu and Junruo. He quickly left them behind and welcomed them, saying, "Sir, why did you and your wife come over?" "I'm here for promotion, call the team over, and open the door of the county government." Zhao, the editor-in-chief, said. "Sir, you just arrived today and have been tired from the journey. Why don't you take a break?" Han Mu said, "I'm not tired." But Zhao, the chief clerk, saw Junruo behind him and immediately said, "Madam, you're tired." Junruo said, "I'm not tired either." Zhao, the chief clerk, said. "Then the lower official will send someone to invite Captain Sunday. What should I ask him to do?" Han Mu frowned. "Do I, as a county magistrate, need his consent to be promoted?" No, it's just that the subordinate thinks that the master's master hasn't arrived yet and asks Captain Sun to assist from the side." "No need, my wife can pick it up from the side." Zhao Zhushu widened his eyes in surprise and turned his head to look at Junruo. Junruo gave him a slight smile. "Is this not appropriate?" Han Mu. "What's wrong?" Zhao Zhushu glanced at Junruo and lowered his voice, saying, "After all, Madam is a woman." "What's wrong with the woman? Isn't it the responsibility of the master to give me some advice and help me write some documents?" Han Mu said, "Do you know who my wife is?" "She is Zhao Xiang's granddaughter, who taught her to grow up. She is the most talented woman in the capital, and she is more than enough to guide me." Director Zhao said, "It sounds impressive, but she's still a woman." Han Mu said, "Do you care if she is a man or a woman? Just use it. Go and bring all the files from the county government during this period, and have the prison prepare them. Later, I will bring Chen Huang and others to trial." After speaking, he lifted his foot over the Zhao chief and headed towards the court. After a few steps, he found that Junruo had not followed him. He couldn't help but turn his head to look at her and said, "Why don't you keep up?" Junruo quickly followed suit. The county government was so poor that Junruo rummaged through the office for a while before finally finding a set of pens, ink, paper, and inkstones. She sat on the left side, feeling a bit tired, waiting for the yamen to bring the suspect up. "I had originally planned to familiarize myself with Yixian for a few days before trying this case, but it was only after seeing Zhao as the chief clerk that I realized how bad the situation was. Not only the people of Yixian, but also the two of them are almost unable to support themselves now. And Mr. Zhao is still guarding them layer by layer. This case may be a breakthrough, opening up a breakthrough in Yixian. Regardless of whether the outcome is good or bad, they must do something to quickly tear open the gap in Yixian and find a solution." Junruo lowered his head and looked at the white paper on the table in a daze. This was her idea, and I don't know if Han Mu also thought of it, that's why he thought of the method of holding a court hearing at this time with her. Han Mu flipped through the files on the table with boredom and said, in the more than 2 months since the county magistrate left, these are the only 3 cases. These are 3 things that have not been decided yet, and the rest of the trivial matters were judged by Captain Sun on the spot, so. Han Mu nodded to express his understanding that the county captain indeed had the power to judge the case. He put together 3 files and handed them to Junruo. Okay, let's first try the case of the robbers robbing our county on the way, and leave the rest for now. I'll open the court when I have time. Sir, their robbery is already a fact, where is there any need for interrogation? Just give them a clear verdict. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Resentment. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 Resentment. Not to mention Junruo, Han Mu was shocked and said, is it so easy to make a decisive decision? He looked at Junruo with some uncertainty and was about to stir up. Sun Dogwang and others were first-time offenders. Although they offended our official, they did not commit crimes to death, but Chen Huang and Tian Feng were full of crimes. It's okay to just chop them down. Junruo said. What's the point? Seeing Zhao, the chief clerk, Junruo restrained his temper and tried to squeeze out a smile. With a gentle attitude, he said, County Magistrate, according to the law, a case must be judged with factual evidence, the prisoner's testimony, and witness testimony. Han Mu said, there is already real evidence. This county witnessed their robbery with their own eyes, and this county is a witness. Oh, and there are also Old Sun too and others who can testify. You can also testify. It's complete. Junruo said, then report to the government and the Ministry of Justice, and the execution can only be carried out after the Ministry of Justice verifies that there are no errors. As Han Mu opened her mouth and was about to speak, she quickly said, at least you have to go through a trial. Even if it's true, if you want to convict someone, you still have to go through a trial, right? She clicked on the paper in front of her and said, otherwise, how do we write the confession and the documents to be submitted for verification? Han Mu picked up the startled tree and patted it, bring the people up. The Yamen officials looked at the chief clerk Zhao. Han Mu turned the startled wooden object in his hand and said, why, what I said doesn't work. It's only when Master Zhao says it that it counts, right? Suddenly mentioned, Master Zhao quickly said, of course not. Didn't you hear your orders? Hurry up. The Yamen officials were busy picking up people. The 6 people were quickly brought in, with ropes tied to their hands and not even a chain changed. They were very perfunctory. Han Mu frowned and patted Jingtangmu, saying, speak up. The 6 people kneeling in the hall remained silent. Seeing how disrespectful they were to him, Han Mu was so angry that he gave him a hard slap and was shocked. I can't say it, still don't want to say it. Do you want me to help you recall memories, young master? Zhao, the chief clerk, hurriedly said, sir, you don't need to take action on such a small matter. Just use the big punishment directly. Han Mu glanced at him and said, I often use heavy punishment. Those who don't know think I'm wronging them. They resort to forced punishment, but I don't use it. Editor Zhao. Junruo reminded, although robbers are cruel and intolerable, they cannot be naturally cold and indifferent. Why don't adults invite their families to understand them? Han Mu suddenly remembered that Old Sun Tu and San Bao were still in his hands. He waved his hand at Xiaobei and said, go and find the old grandson and his ancestors. Sun Dogwang, who was kneeling, moved his body and looked up at Han Mu with bright eyes. Old Sun Tu and San Bao were treated as Han Mu's entourage by the Yamen guards and arranged in the backyard together. Old Sun was also obedient, hiding with his 3 treasures on the side, trying not to attract attention as much as possible, thinking that it would be good to have a 2-day meal. He never expected that the person they robbed would be the new county magistrate, let alone that the new county magistrate and the county magistrate's wife were kind-hearted, and even if they didn't arrest their ancestors and grandchildren, they would be given food. So in order to survive, Old Sun decided to have a thicker skin and hide in the backyard of the county government office with his grandson, hoping to stay one more day. I never expected that they would be taken to the lobby after a whole day has passed. The old grandson knelt down with his head pulling his grandson, nervously swallowing his saliva. Han Mu played with the startled wood in his hand and lifted his chin at him. Old Sun, your 2 sons and nephews are very stubborn. Do you advise them? Confess early, they will be relaxed, and I will be relaxed too. Otherwise, I will offend you. If you really use punishment, it won't be me who will suffer. Old Sun repeatedly exclaimed and leaned forward to his son's head, cursing loudly, if you're honest, I've told you before that even if you're hungry, you can't rob. You're so hungry you can't walk. What can you hit? Sure enough, you've met a brave and powerful adult. They beat all 4 of you down with just one move. Don't you dare to speak up, do you still want the adult to beat you up? Old Sun said, you're not fighting for yourself, you're fighting for me in Sanbao. If you don't honestly explain it, why don't you ask the adult to beat me and Sanbao to death? Han Mu felt quite comfortable being flattered by him and raised his hand, saying, my father-in-law is too worried. How could a good person like me take action against the elderly and children? Old Sun head. Sir, I'm trying to persuade people. Zhao, the chief clerk, couldn't help but glance at Han Mu, feeling that it was a bit mysterious to obtain a confession based on this, and perhaps it would still require punishment. Who knew that Sun Dogwang suddenly burst into tears, looking up and crying loudly. Han Mu and Gu Junruo were both startled and strategically leaned back on their chairs. The ink on the tip of the pen almost dripped. Gu Junruo put the pen down hurriedly and heard Sun Dogwang crying with tears and snivel. Sir, we are going to rob, but we don't want to kill anyone. We just want to get a mantu to eat and save a life. Han Mu, who was huddled in his chair holding Jingtangmu, couldn't help but snort coldly and patted Jingtangmu, saying, you're lying to ghosts. When you stopped us, it was clear that you wanted to kill and grab things. When I was blind, was my ears deaf? It's unreasonable to want to capture him and Gu Junruo and sell them. At the thought of this, Han Mu's anger surged again, and his hands felt a bit itchy. What should he do if he wanted to hit someone? Sun Dogwang cried and said, this is all Chen Huang and Tianfeng's intention. We don't want it to be like this, it's just that they are overbearing. If we don't listen to them, we will be killed by them. Are the 4 of you still afraid of the 2 of them? Han Mu startled the audience with a slap. You're not treating them honestly. It's true, I dare not hide it. He. Sun Dogwang carefully glanced at Chen Huang and whispered, he has killed people before, and we definitely can't beat him. As soon as these words were spoken, Han Mu and Gu Junruo's faces darkened. Even Zhao Zhushu's face changed, and everyone looked at Chen Huang in disgust, have you really killed anyone? Chen Huang sneered at them, his gaze sliding from Han Mu to Gu Junruo's face like a venomous snake. He stuck to her and said, what's killing? If it weren't for Grandpa and me not having enough to eat, you would have wanted to catch me too. But it's a pity to kill with such a woman's color. Compared to death, you have a better place to go. Han Mu slammed down the startled tree with a loud bang, got up, and walked to Gu Junruo's table to block Chen Huang's gaze. Seeing Gu Junruo's face turn pale, and Han Mu was also angered by him, he laughed proudly for a while. The smile on his face suddenly faded away, and he looked at them with resentment in his eyes, saying, if you say I kill people, shouldn't this world kill them? Do you wealthy people kill too few people? After speaking, he rushed towards Gu Junruo behind Han Mu, and the Yamen guards immediately rushed forward to stop him. Han Mu wouldn't wait for them to take action, just lifting his foot to his chest and kicking him away. Before he could release his anger, he stepped on his chest and his face froze. Bullying soft and afraid of hard things, do you dare to come at me? It's me who hit you, I'm also the one who caught you, and now it's me who's stepping on you. You. Chen Huang waited for Han Mu with resentment, struggled hard for a moment, and found that he couldn't get rid of it. He glared at him angrily. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Ideas. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 Ideas. Gu Junruo walked up to Han Mu's side, lowered his head and met his gaze without fear, saying, "Whoever kills someone will always be killed, and there is a law to cure you." Chen Huang thought of something and glared at her with some resentment. Han Mu's face darkened, and he pulled Gu Junruo behind him to block her. He released his foot and said, "Pull him down and beat him up. Wait until he can speak honestly before dragging him up." Gu Junruo. But she didn't stop this time. Tian Feng trembled on the side, and Han Mu asked him, "Why, did you also kill someone?" Tian Feng's face turned pale as he fell to the ground and shook his head repeatedly. His expression seemed to be lying. Han Mu snorted and waved his hand, "Take him down and beat him up." The Yamen runner pulled Tian Feng down, and Tian Feng was so scared that he wet his pants. He shouted at the top of his lungs, "I am unjustified, I am unjustified, Chen Huang forced me to kill him. If I don't kill him, he will kill me. I am unjustified, I am unjustified." Han Mu replied with a hum, and then looked at the four of Sun Dogwang. The four of them trembled and shivered. Han Mu pointed at them and said, "Considering that you are a first-time offender and have encountered this wise and powerful county, and have not harmed anyone else, this county will spare your life according to the law." He glanced at Gu Junruo behind him and gestured to her, "According to the law." Gu Junruo interjected, "According to the law, it should be sentenced to 3 years in prison." Sun Dogwang and the others were taken aback and immediately kowtowed to acknowledge the punishment. Han Mu also felt that the punishment was appropriate, so he waved his hand and wanted to agree. However, Zhao Zhushu's face changed greatly, and he raised his hand and loudly said, "No way." Everyone turned their heads to look at him. Zhao, the chief clerk, ignored the gaze of Sun Dogwang and others and walked up to Han Mu, carefully pulling him aside and whispering, "Your Highness, you cannot be sentenced to prison. I don't think they have hurt you either. How about you, Your Highness, let them go." Han Mu looked at him skeptically and said, "Did you privately take their benefits?" Mr. Zhao said, "Do you think I am that kind of person? And do they seem like people who can afford to benefit? The last question you asked is reasonable. So why do you persuade this county to let them go? You can even speak up for serious cases like robbery and blocking the way. How many cases are there in Yixian with such vague judgments?" Mr. Zhao said, "You're right. Blocking the way and robbing is indeed a heinous crime. Why don't you kill them?" Not to mention Han Mu, Gu Junruo, who was listening with his ears up, was stunned. Are the judgments of the county government officials so extreme now? Either they let go or behead. Seeing the county magistrate and his wife both looking at him with shock on their faces, Zhao, the chief clerk, said helplessly, "Your Excellency, this is also an act of helplessness. Even if you don't chop them down, they won't survive in prison for a few days." Han Mu. Why? Because there's nothing to eat. Zhao, the chief clerk, spread out his hand and said, "The county government can't even give out the adult's salary in rice now. The government officials are all hungry. Where else do the prisoners in the prison have food to eat?" He said, "Sentenced to prison, even if we go in, we will die. If we die, adults and we will also bear the charge of dereliction of duty. You see, they are all going to die, why do we still have to suffer?" Han Mu and Gu Junruo looked at Mr. Zhao in shock. Zhao, on the other hand, looked at the two with a cold expression on his face and advised them, in fact, sentencing them to execution is also beneficial. Killing the chicken as a warning to the monkeys can also show the disaster victims inside and outside the county. The outcome of blocking the way and looting will surely deter them from daring to take action again. Gu Junruo, so the Zhao chief knew they were disaster victims. Both of them glanced at each other and knew that the most important thing at the moment was food. Without food, not to mention using the power of judgment to control the county government, it was uncertain whether the people could survive. The county magistrate is a high-ranking official, but high-ranking officials and high-ranking officials also require children. If all the people starve to death, who will Han Mu appoint as a high-ranking official? Just starving to death, he feels sorry for it. After all, it's his own child, isn't it? After thinking for a moment, Han Mu waved his hand and said, "Take the person down first, and then judge later." Old Sun's heart was filled with fear, and he kept looking at Han Mu and Gu Junruo. Gu Junruo felt sorry for them and thought of driving them onto the street like this. In a few days, he might starve to death. He simply said, "You go to the backyard, stay at the gatehouse for the time being, and keep an eye on the door for us." Upon hearing this, Old Sun felt that there was still room for maneuver in this case, at least he wouldn't really chop his head. So he knelt down together under the pressure of Sanbao and kowtowed to the two of them with a thud. Han Mu was startled and quickly jumped away. "Don't ruin my life," he said. Old Sun grinned and said repeatedly, "No, no, adults are our parents. It's only natural for me to kneel down to you." Han Mu. He doesn't have such an old son. He waved his hand wearily and asked the yamen to take them to the backyard. As soon as Lao Sun Tu and his grandparents left, Han Mu sat down on the official chair, lifting his chin and looking down at Zhao Zhushu. "Tell me, where are we going to get grain in this county and how can we get it?" Zhao, the chief clerk, was about to speak with a puzzled expression. Han Mu first raised his hand to stop what he wanted to say. "Our county is tired and hungry today, but we don't have time to listen to your hypocrisy. This time, our county will ask you if there is a way. You can tell our county that we can discuss it with you. If you want to say no, we will write to your majesty and ask his majesty to send another county magistrate for you. I will hang the seal and return to Beijing first." He tapped the palm of his hand with a startled tree and said, "The next county magistrate will be in office in about 2 or 3 months. If you're lucky, maybe you can see the new county magistrate by the end of the year, but I don't know how many people are left inside and outside of Yixian to breathe." Zhao Zhushu's face turned slightly pale, and he put away his embarrassment. With a solemn expression, he said, "Your Excellency, you can buy grain from the grain merchants to provide relief." "I don't have the money," Han Mu asked again. "Which grain merchant did I buy from?" Before Mr. Zhao could have a heart attack, he paused for a moment when asked a question before answering, "Yao family." He added, "His family is the largest grain merchant in Yixian." Gu Junruo asked, "Which family is the most respected noble family in Yixian?" Zhao Zhushu bowed and said, "It's the Zeng family." Gu Junruo said, "Whose family is next?" Zhao Zhushu paused for a moment before saying, "It's the Yu family. I heard that someone has made achievements in distributing kanji in the county during this period." "Are they Zhengs and Yus?" "Yes." Gu Junruo asked, "What is the relationship between the Yao, Zheng, and Yu families?" Zhao Zhushu's forehead was slightly sweating, but he still replied, "The Yao family and the Zheng family are relatives by marriage, while the Yu family and the two families are neighbors. I have never heard of any other relationships. Is that right?" Gu Junruo looked at Han Mu. Han Mu brought the topic back and continued, "We don't have money. Does the county government have money? If the county government had money, would a group of people still be waiting for Han Mu to come and feed?" So Zhao shook his head and said that the county government had no money left. Han Mu sneered, "Besides buying grain, what other way can we raise grain?" Seeing his expression of embarrassment again, Han Mu couldn't help but click and get angry, saying, "You're still not a man, stuttering and stuttering. What kind of words do you sound like?" He said, "If you have anything to say, just say it quickly. I don't have that much time to wait." Zhao, the chief clerk, could only helplessly say, "We can still borrow grain." End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Mortgage of official land. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Chapter 10 Mortgage of Official Land. Upon hearing this, Han Mu became happy and leaned forward, saying, "This is a good method. I love borrowing things the most. Who do you want to borrow from and how do you want to borrow them?" Zhao, the chief clerk, quietly breathed a sigh of relief. Although it was different from what he had planned, things did indeed develop in the direction he had imagined. The Yao, Yu, and Zheng families are all wealthy, and there must be grain reserves in their families. As long as the adults personally come forward and sincerely ask, I believe they are willing to lend out food. Han Mu. Really? Gu Junruo didn't expect him to be so innocent, so he glanced at him and looked at the Zhao clerk. Mr. Zhao didn't expect this, so he couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. After a while, he pondered and said, "As long as you are sincere, I think there is a great possibility of borrowing it." Han Mu had already calculated and turned his head seriously to ask Gu Junruo, "You said I took them to drink and drank them all down. Can they see my sincerity?" Editor Zhao. Whenever these words were spoken to him, he would not be so complacent. He would only assume that Han Mu was mocking him, but we both knew that the other person was still a smart person. He was not afraid of the other person's strange behavior, but he was afraid that the other person was really foolish. But now Han Mu is speaking to Gu Junruo, so he is not acting in a strange way, but really planning on doing so. Editor Zhao. Well-intentioned. Gu Junruo looked coldly at Zhao Zhushu, feeling exhausted before saying, "What kind of sincerity do they need?" Upon hearing this question, Zhao, the chief clerk, was invigorated and quickly said, "After all, you are a new county magistrate, and everyone is not very familiar with you, so I think they may need some collateral." Han Mu couldn't help but glance at him. Did sincerity need to be replaced by material things? But he still asked, "What collateral do you want?" Zhao, the chief clerk, pondered and said, "The county government doesn't have anything good either. Generally, they just don't like it. Perhaps they can take the official fields listed in the brochure and give it a try." Oh, Han Mu looked at him with a smile on his face, "I understand. Do you want to encroach on official land?" Zhao, the chief clerk, never expected Han Mu to think of this level. He was both afraid and helpless, so he calmed down and said, "Your Excellency, I am wholeheartedly dedicated to the people of Yixian, really." Han Mu snorted and asked, "So using official land as collateral was what they revealed to you?" "If we don't use official land as collateral, what else can our county government take out as collateral?" said Zhao, the chief clerk with a sorrowful expression. Han Mu also remained silent. Yixian looked very poor and indeed not very wealthy. He looked at Gu Junruo. Gu Junruo shook his head slightly at him, asking him not to respond first, but to understand the situation before making a conclusion. They were discussing when the yamen attendant who had dragged the two down to fight the board came back panting with the board. "Sir, they fainted. Are you still fighting?" Upon hearing this, Han Mu decided to first try the case, so he waved his hand and said, "Wake up the people and drag them up." The yamen runner went out and one person splashed a bucket of water to wake them up, then dragged them back to the court and threw them away. The yamen attendants were originally hungry, but this time they fought and dragged, their stomachs became even faster, and their temper became a bit bad. When they left the person behind, they were rough and their feet were rough. Chen Huang and Tian Feng, who were already feeling a bit drowsy, were instantly knocked awake. Han Mu sat on the chair, patted Jing Tangmu, and raised his chin, saying, "Let's talk, starting from your first crime." This time, Tian Feng was the first to speak up. Speaking of me, Chen Huang and I are from the same hometown, and I know everything about him." He was afraid that Chen Huang would argue with the county magistrate again, so he would be dragged down and beaten up again. Although it seems that he can no longer live, he doesn't want to be beaten before being beheaded. Moreover, he is now in pain and hunger, feeling that his soul has been separated into 7 parts, and he really doesn't want to be beaten again. Chen Huang was probably convinced and remained silent, allowing Tianfeng to confess. Gu Junruo picked up his pen and sat down, beginning to record their criminal evidence. After the trial of this case was completed, everyone in and out of the court was starving, and the yamen attendants had even more pale faces. The actions of dragging the prisoner down were light and rough, and Han Mu was speechless for the first time when he saw such contradictory actions. Mr. Zhao was also hungry and wanted to go home to eat something, so he said goodbye to Han Mu. Han Mu looked quietly at the powerless yamen attendant outside the lobby and turned his head, saying, "You stay and have dinner with us," while also discussing the matter of food. The yamen runners heard the word eat with sharp ears and immediately turned their heads to look, their eyes shining green, but they dared not speak. Gu Junruo felt uneasy when he saw it. Perhaps sensing her unease, Han Mu turned his head to look at her and reached out to hold her hand. "Let's go, let the yamen runner who worked in the yamen today come to the backyard to help, and we'll have a meal together later," he said without the need for Zhao's chief clerk to deliver messages. The yamen attendants heard it themselves. With a low cheer, they tied up Chen Huang and Tianfeng and threw them into the side room of the county yamen, then hurriedly followed suit. Everyone followed Han Mu back to the backyard from the small door, and Xiao Bei greeted him and said, "Young master, the food is already cooked, but there aren't many dishes here, so don't worry about the dishes for now, bring the food up and let everyone eat until they are full." Xiao Bei. He lowered his voice and said, "Young master, we don't have much food left. With so many people in the house, we can eat enough until the day after tomorrow." Although everyone couldn't hear what they were saying, they could tell from their expressions. The most common expression that people in Yixian have seen during this period is this kind of expression. The yamen runners looked a bit disappointed, as if they had nothing to eat again. Han Mu patted him and said, "There's so much nonsense. If you bring it, just bring it." Xiao Beijian looked at Gu Junruo as if he didn't know how expensive the firewood, rice, oil, and salt were. Gu Junruo said, "If it is not enough, just cook it now. Let's boil it all into congee. Add more water to the already cooked rice. It's more like this." Xiao Bei opened his mouth wide. Han Mu glanced at him and said, Xiao Bei regained his senses and immediately bowed, saying, "I'll arrange it now." Han Mu waved his hand and pointed at a few yamen runners, saying, "Let them help, hurry up and cook." As soon as the yamen runners heard this, they immediately followed suit. They didn't mind helping at all. The yamen officials took the initiative to help chop firewood, wash pots, and set fire. Xiao Bei and Xiao Chan took out their grain bags, washed and cooked the last rice, and a group of people gathered around the stove to wait. Xiao Bei couldn't help but sigh when he saw them like this. No wonder their young master was soft-hearted and looked a bit pitiful. Just what do they have for tomorrow? Han Mu was also spreading his hand to Zhao, saying, "Noah, we've eaten all the food we brought. I'm going hungry like you guys, so let's brainstorm and think about how to get the food." Mr. Zhao didn't expect the new county magistrate to be so generous. He was somewhat moved, but more worried. Because the new county magistrate doesn't seem to be very intelligent, can such an unintelligent county magistrate really raise food for Yixian? End of this chapter.